Recording in progress. And I think there's a couple of new people. Well, I know there's at least two new people here. So the conceit of this meetup is that it's 1882, and you have just acquired a copy of the Gay Science, and you're just reading it as we read it. So you don't know what's coming down the road. You don't know what 20th century philosophers have said about what Nietzsche's thinking or meaning or whatever. You're on your own. And the idea behind this is to approach Nietzsche with a beginner's mind. And we're sort of at the beginning of his mature period, according to Walter Kaufmann. And so we're beginning at the beginning, and we're watching things happen, and we are using our own minds to decipher or try to understand what it is that he might mean. So we're approaching the end of book 1. 56 is the last aphorism of book 1. And I don't think we're going to get through them all today. We usually do about 2 or 3 at a time, maybe 4. And today's an hour-and-a-half session, so we'll be with it a little bit longer than usual. Then, well, every other week it's an hour-and-a-half. So we're beginning today with aphorism 50, the argument of growing solitude. And what I thought this was about was an analysis of conformity and why conformity occurs. And it's what he's finding is the herd instinct. And I know there might be a temptation to think of the herd as a pejorative. I don't think that's what he means. I think that he's recognizing that we are animals, and the herd instinct is gathering together in groups. And so I think he's just saying that a fear of being alone in many cases is what will drive us to stay in groups rather than leave. Even if we think the group is doing something that we don't particularly like, we don't want to be by ourselves because of the herd instinct. So that's how I'm taking this. How are you taking it? I see. All right. I will assume that you are all in complete agreement with my analysis. Okay. It's the first time. Oh, Barbara. Barbara.
Hi. Yeah. So I'm not sure that this is that positive, because what he's comparing is a sort of an authentic conscience with fear of rejection because you're violating social norms. And those two things are different. And I think he's not saying it's good not to have a conscience and to only be in that space where you care about what other people think. So the reproach of conscience in my translation is weak compared to the feeling that this is against the morals of your society.
Yeah.
And so when he says the herd instinct, I'm not sure it's that positive. Because I think he's the real inner conscience would be an individual thing and something authentic to the person, and that would be the desirable thing, not this sort of chasing after conformity or something.
Yeah, I'm puzzled a little bit over the quote, what's the closing quotation marks, this or that is against the morals of your society. And I kind of took that to be sort of a recognition on his part, because I think this is more of an observation than carrying any weight, positive or negative. I think he's just sort of observing, but he's got his own approach to this observation so that you can easily interpret it with an opinion of some sort. But when he says your society, and in the translation I have, which is the Kaufman translation, your is italicized. And so what I think he's kind of suggesting here is that different societies will have different different sets of morals or different moral prejudices. And the group you might be part of, oh, I just got a note that my internet is unstable. So if I freeze up, if I freeze up, I'm going to drop out and come back in again, and you should all still be here, and hopefully we can keep going. I'm on my iPhone hotspot, just so you know, in case something breaks up. So I think he's sort of observing that different groups of people have different moral prejudices, and if you're part of that group, even if you have a bad feeling about something that the group is proposing or doing, you will be reluctant to leave. And I think that he's just commenting, the herd instinct speaks up in us. I think he's even recognizing he even has a herd instinct, that's part of what he sees in human beings. Audrey.
Well, I think Barbara's right. And I read it similarly. And what I was getting from him is that if we all did this, even within your own culture, I mean, our own, what does it say, your society, that there would be this multiplicity in our society that would be accepted. So if we all succumb, we're never going to be able to do that. And so to me, it might be an observation. That's, rather than saying it's good or bad, but it sounds to me like he's a deep thinker and he's seeing the possibilities, but he's also seeing that it's really hard to do. And I think he's lived in a time where he could see that for himself in his own experiences. But I don't think there's anything good about following the herd. There's only something good about trying to keep your society going. So that's my feeling. And
Yeah, well, I think the way you've just expressed it, and reconsidering what Barbara said, I think I'm kind of on your side in a way.
oh, come all the way. Come on.
Well, what? I missed that.
Come all the way. Come.
Oh, well,
You
okay,
can
well, I
do.
think he's already established the groundwork that, because in the beginning, aphorism 2 or 3 or something is about the intellectual conscience. And so he is sort of saying that that's something he does value, the individual conscience. And here he's just observing that not a lot of people maybe follow that because of the herd instinct. Nick.
Yeah, thanks. I wonder if I could help to understand the first sentence. I have trouble understanding it. So let me tell you my puzzlement. The very first sentence contrasts two concepts. One is the reproaches of conscience. The reproaches of conscience. That compared to the second concept, the feeling with the quotation mark. So what is the difference? What's the difference of the reproaches of conscience versus the feeling, the quotation mark, this and that against morals? I don't see it. So wonder if I could get help.
Well, I would, some other people may have some thoughts about it too. Reproaches of conscience are just the idea that I think I'm doing something wrong if I do that. That would be a reproach of conscience, I think. And to go against the group that you are a part of for the sake of that reproach that you're delivering just to yourself, in most cases is overcome by the fear of solitude. And then he's just asserting that the herd instinct is what makes this happen that way. So do you understand the reproach idea better, or did that help?
Yeah, it helps. So the key word is society, right? So the second reference talks about a feeling about something against the morals of your society, while the first reference is quite broad, just says approaches of conscience, which could cover anything, including the second part of it, of this sentence.
Well, yeah, but the reproach of conscience would be you personally feeling or having this reproach that you are directing at yourself that says, don't do this. And yet you're
Right.
probably, you're most likely to go do it anyway because the herd instinct develops a feeling of solitude, which is scarier than the reproach that you are putting on yourself.
Right.
Mark,
But there could also be the case where I feel reproach because I'm against the society. So if something
well, if you were
like
against
that.
it, probably leave and find another society. I think society here is more like, I'm going to take it as meaning more of a tribal thing, the society you keep, the company you keep, rather than the larger society at large, because not very many people are likely to leave a whole city or something like that over it. Although maybe that is what he means. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So this is the way I break it down. So there's a lot of similarities between the reproach of conscience and the feeling this or that is against the morals of your society. One is they're both fear. The first one is like, am I evil? And then the second one is kind of like, are other people going to think I'm evil? So they're both a form of fear, and they're both coming from a morality. One is your sense of morality, your own sense of morality, and the other is the morality of the people around you. So the difference between the two, to me, the obvious, or at least to me, the most apparent difference, I should say, is that your own moral sense fear is deeper than the fear of social rejection. It's more deep inside you. It's wherever you go. So it's more inescapable. That fear, am I evil, is a more inescapable question than do these people think I'm evil? Because you can always get yourself around other people, but you can't be another person so easily. So that's one thing, that the internal morality is deeper than the external morality. And the other thing is, there's a practical question, which is that if you decide you're evil or partially evil or whatever, you have control over the actions that you take about that. But if the people around you make that decision, you don't necessarily have control over the actions, i.e., they can decide to ostracize you, put you in prison, execute you, torture you to death, whatever. So there's over your own sense of yourself, you have a certain locus of control that you don't have on the outside. So the one is more inescapable. That's your own self-judgment. But the judgment is more inescapable, your own self-judgment. But the effects of the judgment are more escapable because you have control over yourself. The judgment of others is more inescapable. Is more escapable, but the effects of the judgment is more inescapable because you don't have control over them. So I'm going to say something a little contrary to what Audrey just said, is that it does matter to me what other people think of me. If they want to hunt me down and kill me, that's a big problem. And that could definitely affect my behavior, if not the way I think, because thinking tends to follow behavior in conformity. So if you're forced to behave a certain way, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If somebody makes you do that over and over and over and over again, it's going to affect the way you think. That's why people do make other people do things like that over and over and over again. If it had no effect, there would be no point. That's it. I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Okay, I think you're carrying this a little further than Nietzsche intended it. I don't think it's nearly as extreme as the picture you're painting, although it's appropriate in its own way. But I think the important part of this for me is that observation about the herd instinct, because he's saying it's in all of us. Barbara. Oh, Barbara,
Well,
was your hand up?
It was. I was listening to Mark, and I think he said a lot of what I was thinking. The only thing I would add is that the next to the last sentence, this is the argument that refutes even the best argument for a person or a cause, meaning that a kind of irrational or unthinking following the herd is substitutes, let's say, for logic. And even when there's strong logic on the other side.
Yeah, 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 I agree. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Moving on. So 51, truthfulness. And I think I'm just going to read this whole thing, and then I want to relate it to the quote that I have above me. I think I want to do that. Yes, I do. I favor any skepsis to which I may reply, let us try it. But I no longer wish to hear anything of all those things and questions that do not permit any experiment. This is the limit of my truthfulness, for there courage has lost its right. So the quote I have above me, I've read it before, but I'm just going to get to the last part of it, the last half. This was in notes. This is not in anything he wrote. But there are two aphorisms here in this section that we're doing today that I think reflect our commentary on courage as having the strength for an attack on your convictions. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. I think that is what he's saying about himself, because this is autobiographical. Oh, Audrey.
What quote are you talking about? The note 42?
Yeah, the thing I've got over me on this, no, it's okay, I'll read it for you. A very popular error, having the courage of one's convictions. Rather, courage is having the strength for an attack on one's convictions.
Oh.
And I think this is very related to that sort of thing. That skepticism shouldn't just be dismissed. Try it and see if it has any meaning. Dig deeper into it, examine, have the courage to examine those things that turn up that seem to deny certain things. That's what I sort of am taking from this. A skepsis is I don't know how many of you, I've tried to look it up and couldn't find it, but I think is a skeptical
Yeah, that's what I
argument.
think. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the argument itself.
But the quote seems to relate to 52, so I guess I'm not understanding. I can't read it from the screen behind
Well,
you,
I just
so.
quoted it to you, though. The basic point is to have the courage. Courage is having the strength for an attack on your convictions. And this goes
Right.
back to actual conscience of having the desire for certainty, not expecting to actually get there, but to examine everything you think, approaching.
Okay.
And I think that's sort of what he's getting at here. That's his measure of truthfulness, is to challenge the things that you believe. Barbara.
Yeah, I was having a little bit of trouble with this because mine says I approve of any form of skepticism, to which I can reply, let's try it. So that would not include something like Hume, where he's doubting cause and effect, because you can't really, that's a theoretical position, but you can't really say one way or the other whether he's right. So I wondered when I read this whether he was sort of poking at philosophers who have theoretical positions that are skeptical, but that can't be tested empirically. because he says, I want to hear nothing more about all the things and questions that don't admit of experiment. And then he says, for there, courage has lost its right. So, in other words, that you have, I'm not really sure what that last phrase, courage has lost its right. This is the limit of my sense of truth.
Well, you bring up a really super interesting point. I didn't go there, but I think you may be right on. I think this may be a bit of a dismissal of a lot of untestable notions of skepticism, although I'm not. I don't know that. I don't know how to relate that to Hume exactly, because I thought cause and effect. That was one of the most interesting parts I thought of the treatise, was that he almost seems to just throw his hands in the air and go, I don't know how this works, rather than being skeptical that there is an answer. But I read that a long time ago, so I don't know anymore. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I really like this aphorism, as I actually like a lot of Nietzsche's aphorisms. So what this reminds me of is kind of a subtle critique of a person who asserts their intellect via criticism, but doesn't put anything positive forward that itself can be criticized. So they're always, or frequently, and this is kind of something I've interacted with a lot in my life. They're expressing a lot of skepticism towards other ideas, and they might even articulate a criticism of an idea, but then they don't put anything forward that they would have to defend themselves. So it's a kind of like, I don't believe in anything agnosticism, and to me it seems kind of cowardly, because you can't ever be wrong if you don't ever put your foot down on anything. And that's one thing I really admire about Nietzsche. He makes a lot of very definite declarations that you can agree with, or you can disagree with, or you can argue about. But he's not afraid of being wrong. And so when somebody's just throwing out criticisms that can't be grappled with, they're just undermining an idea by their existence as criticisms. But the criticisms don't have any real substance. You can't say, is this criticism true? Is it not true? You can't really examine it. It's just a manifestation of skepticism. Then all it's doing is destructive. It's just tearing something down, and it's not creating anything. So that's the way I relate to this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's sort of related to what Barbara was saying, and I think, and that it's interesting because I didn't go there, but I think you're right. I think you're both right about that. Question that do not permit any experiment. Okay. I'm with you guys on that. Anybody else? All right.
With them too.
What, Audrey?
I'm there too. It sounds.
Okay. Barbara.
Then the last phrase in this aphorism, he says, this is the limit of my sense of truth. In other words, that this, I think, refers to the idea that questions that don't admit of experiment, that's the limit for him. He can't do that. And then he says, for there, or because of that, courage has lost its right. What does that mean?
Well, I think I'm going to just kind of take a stab at it, because that's why I mentioned the note that I had quoted earlier about courage is having the strength for an attack on one's convictions. I think that's sort of related here. Courage there's no attacking, and I haven't got a good example. And I think it is directed more or less at philosophical ideas. It doesn't take any courage to attack a skepsis that cannot be tested. You can just ignore it. You don't have to do anything, but if it can be tested, then you have to have the courage to test it. And
Okay.
it's an awkward phrasing, I have to admit, but it has lost its right. So that may be an assertion that well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Anybody else? No. Oh, okay then. Audrey.
Now I'm confused. I thought Mark had it down. So wait, so for their courage has lost its right. Their courage. But I no longer wish to hear anything at all, those things, and to hear anything of all those things and questions that do not permit any experiment. See, to me, Hume, well, I mean, if we're not allowed to talk about Hume, can we talk about Hume? I mean,
No, Hume preceded Nietzsche, yes.
yes, okay. So Hume, I mean, basically he's just saying it's not going to happen over and over again. It's probabilities, which, that's fine for me. I mean, I think Hume is great personally, but this is the limit of my truthfulness. So if you can't do it, if you can't experiment with the truth, then for those who don't experiment or analyze, if you go back to the previous one, to two that we just read, their, for their courage has lost its right. The courage to experiment. If you don't have the courage to experiment and you think you're right, then I have no use for you. That's the way I saw it. So
Okay, yeah, no, that works, that works. It's the idea of willingness, having the courage to have a willingness
to look into it, to before you say no. Yeah. Okay.
So that's why he's thrown the word experiment in, and the note is somewhat helpful too, Kaufman's note.
Right, I saw that.
It's just a reference to his own magnum opus. All right, 52. What others know about us. 52. Oh, I think this is related to the herd instinct in 50. It's very similar in its expression of Celsus. It is easier to cope with a bad conscience than to cope with a bad reputation. And I think, again, I'm feeling like this is kind of an observation, not necessarily for him, but for the most people. And I think this is related to 50. It's sort of a sister to 50, if you will. What others know assaults us, or think they know. Then we realize that this is more powerful. I'm going to guess we've all had that experience where somebody has been able to shame us in some way, or at least indicate, or we've embarrassed ourselves by doing something. Audrey.
Yes, I certainly have had this experience many times. So, and it's interesting. But I always allow myself to cope with the bad reputation, but I don't care sometimes, if it's interesting though that he does this. So I was wondering, like, is there something that he talked about before in his previous writings that would seem like this would come up? Because this is like this is a specificity that I feel that the others are lacking. This seems like this happened to me, kind of more personal. And I was just wondering, because I took it pretty personally, because and all these, I have a list of all these things I messed up, so. That
Well,
came,
I have a book of Nietzsche's letters to different friends. I don't know, I may be violating my little 1882 principle here because I don't know when it was written. But he wrote to one of his friends somewhere along the line that when he went out the door and met other people. The philosophy was just being done by himself in his room, writing, thinking, doing his stuff. And he would come up with these notions. And then when he would go out into the group again and be part of the society, that his whole philosophy fell apart. And he didn't mean that literally, like it collapsed, but he could feel himself being overwhelmed by a certain amount of pleasure. And he did have friends. And, he just wasn't a hermit for all of his life. And I'm not relating that to this very well, am I?
I'm not judging you. Go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, it's just the idea. I'm thinking about this. It's easier to cope with a bad conscience than to cope with a bad reputation. And I'm going to suppose that he really was a fairly nice person. He didn't want to be thought of badly, even though he was observing and thinking about all of these things that really dismisses the standard society. We've been through a lot of that already. The culture is all screwed up, but when he's out in it, even though he has a bad conscience because he doesn't think the way everybody else is thinking, but he doesn't want to be thought of badly by other people. I'm not giving you a specific part of it, but
Right.
that was a feeling he expressed to this friend, Rhoda, or so I'm not quite sure who the friend was in particular, but he had a voluminous correspondence with not a lot, there were probably 3 or 4 or 5 really important people around him that he corresponded with fairly regularly. I don't know. I don't know if that helped.
Interesting.
Barbara.
Yeah, well, one thing this kind of implies is that the inner person and the outer person can't be consistent or must be inconsistent, which is kind of interesting because it's like saying society can never know, but they still judge. And I don't know when this idea of the mask came up. I remember if I'm off base or out of time or something, let me know. But I think that he, at least once or twice, I think he's put forward the idea that when you go out into society, you have to wear some kind of mask. Otherwise, people will judge you without getting what's really inside you. So you have so you have to adopt some sort of costume, I guess, that's consistent with what they would expect.
Yeah, I think that's the implication of this. Christopher.
I was just trying to help you make the connection because what I thought you were referring to 51 with that letter, because when he's done facing the people, like he's basically failing to put his philosophy to experiment, like, the limit of sense of truth. Like if it's failing when he talks to people about it, isn't that a sign that he doesn't have the truth? Because I found that 51 was kind of weird to put between 50 and 52. Why did he squeeze that in there? I don't know. It was just a random association. Might be. I guess your letter was not even about this text, so it's probably a long shot.
Yeah, no, it wasn't about this text specifically at all. It was just an observation that I thought might be a little bit helpful. That was the only reason I kind of pulled it in. Audrey.
Well, the easier to cope, it's easier to cope with a bad conscience than to cope with a bad reputation. Okay. But he starts off with what we know about ourselves and remember is not so decisive for the happiness of our life as people suppose. One day, that which others know about us, one day, that which others know about us or think they know assaults us. And then we realize that this is more powerful. So in other words, in my personal life, if I may bring it up, is that if I have, like I said, I've made mistakes. If there's one time I did something and I'm judged on that all the time, if somebody knows about it, they're not looking at any of the nuances and complexities of my life that got me to do that. And in my situations, like, you know, I'm a president of an HOA, so when I do something against what everybody wants, or when I ask about something that I prefer that everybody doesn't want to do, I give all my reasons why I think it's a totally stupid idea, and I don't mind saying stupid. But at the same time, I live in a group, and if this is all what you want, then fine, let's do it. But know that, just note that I'm doing this because we want to have a pleasurable, working, living relationship with neighbors. So therefore, but if it was totally against me, I would argue it and argue it and argue it. So,
Yeah.
but then somebody later on, like if I left the HOA, somebody could say, oh, well, she did this once and she went against it and she was like authoritarian or something like that. And she's an authoritarian, so I don't trust her. That they've lost who I am. Anyway, so that's my thought on that. Hello, Jason.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm late.
I don't mind any personal experience. I think that might even help, as long as it's relevant to the aphorism that we're talking about at the time. And I think the piece you just gave was. And one other thought I just wanted to kind of put out there again is that this is before Freud. Before Freud was really writing a lot of his stuff and creating psychoanalysis. And Kaufman's opinion of Nietzsche is that Nietzsche was one of, and I think Freud even seconded this, that Freud was, Nietzsche was a great psychologist. And I think that's partly, this isn't necessarily philosophical so much as it's a psychological observation, or it might be both. But the psychology expressed here, I think we've all got stories that will agree with like what you just said. And I could think of 100 moments where something happened that I thought I had created a bad impression, and I felt terrible for 2 or 3 days, and until I was able to correct it with the group I was with. Mark.
Yeah, I lost track of my thoughts a little bit there. So I wanted to comment on what the preceding speaker said. I don't know what his name was, but about like the brass or the potency of the truth if it can't maintain itself with contact with other people. So I would say that depends a lot, because um, what most people think is not necessarily the truth. The truth is, at least for me, the way I think about it, it's eminently practical for oneself. And I have all sorts of things that I believe that hardly or nobody else believes. And my criteria isn't whether other people agree with it or not, although that is important. It's important to hear what other people think about it, but it's important to assess their responses. Because a lot of times what I hear is the same arguments that I've already heard, that I've already refuted in my own mind. Or a lot of times I hear fear. People are afraid, and I can tell by the way they're responding. In fact, their responses are predictable. So, and if I'm not willing to tell somebody something, that doesn't necessarily mean that my conception is wrong. It might just mean I'm afraid of the consequences of telling somebody something. Um, so, um, so I think that the important thing there is that the understanding of the truth it's practical, but it's also, to me, it's personal. There's a social aspect to that practicality too, but there's an asocial aspect to that too. There's a personal aspect, which is different than the social. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, well, let me just ask you one thing. As a psychological observation, do you think he's correct?
What others know about others? No, not necessarily. That's a good point. Okay, I forgot. I lost track. I think this is a statement about Nietzsche himself. I'm not like, it is easier to deal with a bad conscience than a bad reputation, right? I think it's easier for Nietzsche to deal with a bad conscience than a bad reputation. I'm not sure that's true about everybody. Yeah. So I would say in general, no, I don't think it's true. I think it's true for Nietzsche. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think it's true for most people that a bad conscience is one thing and a bad reputation is something a lot worse. Christina.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, maybe my reading is incorrect, but if you are very self-conscious, you might deal with more difficulty with your conscience than with the reputation. In my case, for example, let's say I felt I wronged somebody, and then I will feel miserably and I couldn't sleep and all that, but it's more I am against myself, I am against my doing. It's not that I care that much about my reputation. I care about the fact that I was not true to myself when I wronged that person. All right, so to me, but maybe it's not a good reading of what he means here.
Well, you're on to something for sure, but I think you've personalized it a little too much. I think that almost all of us here would sort of speak for ourselves as if the bad conscience would overwhelm whatever the reputational effect might be. But I think generally speaking, and I know that's not true of everything at all. There are times when I felt bad about something that I did because of the reputation that was at stake in a way. I haven't got a ready example, but I think generally speaking, broadly, most people, and I know that this is true of me at some point, a bad conscience is not as deeply felt as a bad reputation. I'm not sure I've ever really had a bad reputation, so I can't speak to that particularly. But I think generally, I think the statement is essentially true. Just that part of it alone is essentially true from a psychological point of view, that I think this describes some kinds of human behavior. And a bad conscience may just be a little thing. It doesn't have to be that you're torturing yourself over a great, moral transgression or something like that. It could be just a little thing. And reputation will win when it comes to that. So that's what I think. It would not, and I'm not dismissing what you said because that's relevant too. But the extreme cases, I think, are just not what he's commenting on here. Jason.
Yeah, I think he said, and also give us advice. He talked about the last sentence, right? It is easier to cope with a bad conscience than to cope with a bad reputation. So I think he's talking about most people don't like have a bad conscience because they worry about they have the bad reputation. So what is bad conscience? That means at the beginning, he talked about what I know myself, what I remember. So for example, I did something bad, something wrong. I have a bad conscience on that. That's nothing to worry about that because according to Nietzsche's advice, because what you worry is your bad reputation, which, he said it's easier to cope, than to cover the bad reputation. So just ignore the bad reputation. That's how other people know me. So bad conscience, another way to look at it is the feeling of guilt. Okay, so ignore it. Okay, well, that's fine. You have it. And then if you tie that to bad reputation, it'll become difficult to deal. So just focus. And then I say that because I read the 53 also, because 53 said the bad conscience is good. At least that's That's my understanding, you know. So
We're not there yet, so wait
I
till we
know,
go there.
I know, but
And turn the heat on, dude.
yeah, that's just a one step spoil. So I think it should be forgive us.
Barbara.
Well, you know, this one here, it seems to me that it's a little bit cynical, because what he's saying is that concern about your reputation will trump, excuse the language, your conscience every time, or almost every time. So that to me it's a couple of things that makes me, I see the psychology in it, but I always look at Nietzsche more as a sociologist, because he's so concerned with how people perform for each other, you know, in society, and the kinds of constructs that they make by doing what they do aimed at other people. So it's kind of course, there's psychology in that, but it's also, it seems to me that he's talking about how society is constructed and built, and he might even be talking about what happens when society takes another step and becomes political, like Audrey was talking about, where you have a group of people who are negotiating their concerns. They're really, it's not that they're lying, but they are performing for each other. And that kind of thing always, I think he says, ends up with a concern about how you look rather than how what your inner feelings about what you did are.
Yeah, I agree with that. Christopher.
Yeah, I really like what Jason said, because bad conscience is, I guess, how you validate your reputation, because there are many people that of different opinions. So some will always think that you're bad, no matter what. So yeah, you're not going to care about your reputation from the people you don't respect. And then your bad conscience is what then determines whose opinion you care about. But I think the key word maybe is assails us, because he's saying that it's when other people come, I had to look up assails, like to make a concerted or violent attack on. So I thought no one has mentioned that yet, that he's really just talking about when people violently attack us, then your bad reputation is going to matter a lot more than your conscience. I thought that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I tend to just kind of stick with the words, and it's the extremes that can be brought into this, I don't think are really contained in it. I think he's just asserting a fairly simple statement that a bad conscience generally will give in to a bad reputation, a fear of a bad reputation. That in a group setting, especially, that will be more important for most people than a bad conscience about something that maybe the group is doing, or you know, and it can be simple little things too. I just don't think this has the breadth that some of you think it does, or are asserting it does. Mark.
Yeah, you make a really strong argument there, Lindsay. I'm going to do my best to push back against it. So what I said was that this was true for Nietzsche, but not necessarily true for others. And you said you thought it was true for most people. That might be. I'm not sure. But I want to give you a couple examples about why I think it might not be. A really common piece of advice that I get when I get into a conflict with another person, that really frustrates me. It makes me want to like roll my eyes. Is people will say something like, well, just tell them the truth and how you feel, and then, you know, whatever they decide to make of that, that's their problem, right? So to me, what that is that's clearing your conscience. You be completely truthful, you give them the truth, damn the consequences. I know I said what was real, so my conscience is clear, but what's the actual effect? See, that's why I hate this piece of advice, because I don't give a shit about that. Well, I'm fine with my conscience. What I want to do is I want to have a connection with the other person that kind of like appeases them in a way that's sustainable. I don't want to tell them something that I completely can't live up to or isn't sustainable, because that's just like lying or whatever, flattery. That's just going to collapse. But I do want to tell them something that I can sustain, that kind of heals things over and connects it. So I'm not looking for like vomiting the truth on them. I'm looking for an actual social effect, right? But what the advice that I get often is, it's dominated by this idea of, well, you just do what you can and then the rest is up to them. That's what I call the clearing the conscience approach to it. You feel, it's not my fault. I said the truth, but now the other person just has to deal with it. Okay, so to me, that's a strong preference for a good conscience and a bad reputation. Okay, and the other thing I want to comment about is, you can escape a bad reputation, but you can't escape a bad conscience, because you can go to other people. But Nietzsche can't do that. So, and what I'm saying about this is because what Nietzsche thinks, the way that he thinks, is so far outside the dominant ideological hegemony in his society, that he could talk to this person or he could talk to that person. But if he was clear and open, he would get a bad reputation everywhere. But that's not true for everybody. Some people can find people and they can say exactly what's on their mind, and those people will accept them, and other people won't. So some people have the ability to clear their conscience, just to say completely what's on their mind and be accepted in a certain context. But Nietzsche doesn't have that ability. So he can't just take the bad reputation, because he can't escape the bad reputation. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, you may be right about Nietzsche. I'm not going to even attempt to psychoanalyze Nietzsche's thinking at all. And I don't think that this aphorism is a statement of what everybody is compelled to do. It clearly doesn't apply to you. But I think he's just trying to say that, broadly speaking, this is what he thinks is true. Audrey.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he thinks this is true, that it's easier to cope with a bad conscience. You can put off yourself and your own comfort. And, it's martyrdom in some ways, it depends on the situation. It's completely dependent on the situation. And what I was talking about was feeling it important to tell people what I was thinking and how I got to that thought, because I didn't want people to think that I was just one way. So I don't pretend to understand what Nietzsche meant either. And but that's the way I see this. So thanks.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Christina.
Yes, something that comes to my mind also is the fact that we are not always aware about the impact that we have on others. That's why you have the sentence here: one day that which others know about us assaults us. Because I might say something and I'm not aware how much that thing can affect the other, and the other will be like very affected by it, but I'm not even conscious about that. Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, I was muted. I said, yes, thank you for that. So, Barbara.
Yeah, well, you have to think about the society that he lived in too, where there were limited roles for people. I mean, men had more, obviously, range than women did, but still, it wasn't like today, where you could say, I don't care what people think of me. The fact that women wore whalebone corsets were right there, it's like you're really thinking about your waistline, you're really thinking about how you present, and there's only so much of a venue for presenting, and it all has to do with the way other people gather around and look at you and then talk about you. So I can see his concern, and it might not be, I mean, I think it is still really a concern today, but I can imagine what it must have been like in a society like that.
Well, I think it's more, this again, I'm going to actually, instead of expanding it, I'm going to suggest shrinking it down. All he says is what others think of us. And so if you're an iconoclast, you're probably going to have and be surrounded by a group of iconoclasts. And it's possible to offend this group of friends that suddenly you're part of the system, or that's what the man would do, or something like that. And that's going to hurt, even though you feel like you're still being iconoclastic, breaking the mold, and you might feel bad because your tribe, you have transgressed in some way, and you have a bad conscience about having done it, and you will repair that damage to your reputation. Or you're just going to go off and be all by yourself, which again reflects that solitude idea, that's the herd instinct sort of goes against that. So I'm just offering that. Nick.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you just said what I wanted to say, your last sentence, which is this aphorism, this ranking of conscience versus reputation is consistent with the ranking he had in the very first aphorism we read today. Yeah. So in that sense, the ranking sequence is consistent in two aphorisms. That's how I read this hierarchy.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Okie dokie. Moving on. 53, where the good begins. So what did I say about this? Oh, okay. This is, I think, an explanation and an attack on Manichaean thinking. That is, something is either good or evil. And so when something that would seemed evil suddenly doesn't seem so evil anymore, and rather than just modifying your sense of it, if you are part of this crowd, you will suddenly decide that it's good. And I think this attack on that kind of moral thinking, well, that's where I am with that one. And great thinkers will not think that way. Fred.
The syntax is somewhat tortured here. I don't think that's Nietzsche's fault. This would read a lot more easily in German. I don't know what your translation reads, but the first sentence, which is very long, is kind of run on with clauses and stuff. But as far as I can tell, unraveling it, the gist of it is that evil can be subtle. And the common people are too dim-witted to see the subtleness of evil. So they posit goodness, which is why the common people can be so happy. It's because they're not seeing evil for seeing the evil, and they're just kind of content with security, comfort, and benevolence. Whereas unlike the unwashed masses who are too dim-witted to see this, the great thinkers, and here I'm sure Nietzsche primarily means himself, can see the evil drive, and that's why they're gloomy and full of grief. Now, I'd be curious about two things. First of all, I'd be curious who he's talking about with the great thinkers, because with philosophy, it's the personal demeanor anyway is a mixed bag, just like everybody else. So, for example, Plato and Kant and Spinoza were, by all accounts, really pretty pleasant, benevolent, decent people. The only thing anybody could say bad about Kant was that sometimes he drank too much in parties and couldn't find his way home. And then there are some people who were gloomy in grief, notably Nietzsche, and also maybe Schopenhauer. But it's very much a mixed bag, and it's certainly no identification of whether they're smart or not, smarter than the average Joe. And secondly, the other thing I'm not entirely clear about is what constitutes the evil drive. So I see it differently here. I see it as one of Nietzsche's main trope is that the common people are sheep who pretend to a morality because it makes them happy, whereas the really smart people like Nietzsche see through that, and that's why they're gloomy and full of grief. But I'd be curious what others think is the evil, what constitutes the evil drive.
Where do you see the evil drive here?
This could be a translation thing.
Well, we're dealing just with whatever the translator has said. None of us have German to refer
No, it
back.
said that evil impulsive. Evil impulsive.
Yeah, and mine says evil drive, evil impulse. I don't know what yours says, but the translation is the eye is no longer able to see the evil drive as such. They're limited by the evil drive, such as this feeling of security, comfort, etc.
Yeah. I would be curious about that too, because when he uses, there's just a lot of equivocation about the notion of good and evil, and it may just be the language itself that compromises what you can say one way or the other. And evil and good are judgments that everybody understands in one way or another. But earlier aphorisms just condemn the whole notion and that there's an opposition between good and evil. And so I'm a little confused too. I can't offer any kind of help on that one. Mark.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I largely agree with the preceding speaker's analysis. And one of the points that I would like to make about what you called Manichaeism, but I like to use the term moral dualism, because Manichaeism is specifically one religion which was renowned for the extremes to which it took this moral dualism. But moral dualism is present in lots of ideologies outside of Manichaeism, although that is the common term that's used in European philosophy to describe it. But one of the aspects about moral dualism, which is really important, is the idea of purity. Is that just a little bit of evil wrecks a lot of good, and evil is associated with anxiety and fear, whereas good is associated with like pleasure and contentedness. And as I think everybody knows, well, I guess we don't know about the divisions of the autonomic nervous system yet at this point, 1883, I'm not sure. But so I won't reference the neurology. But as people know, you can have a lot of pleasure disrupted very quickly by a little teeny bit of fear. And so if you have a threshold of awareness that doesn't allow you to see that, quote, evil, as he uses the term, or that anxiety causing phenomena, then you can be relaxed and happy, as he describes the common people. That's it. Thank you.
You're muted, Lindsay.
Barbara.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. Yeah, this reminds me of when people say that bad has become normal, so when people stop, let's say, I don't know how you feel about eating meat, but let's say the way it's grown, it's not quite so good and it harms the animals and so forth. And yet to comfort ourselves, we blind ourselves to that And instead of calling the meat that we eat flesh, we call it pork, or we call it something, you know, chops, something that sounds really good. And that excites a feeling of security, comfort, and benevolence, because you can buy it packaged in a store and it looks really nice and it cooks up great. And you don't have to think about the evil that's being done. And that could apply to a lot of situations where there might be some consciousness at first that you shouldn't do this, but then there's a slide for whatever reason, money or whatever, into something where people get a lot more comfortable with what maybe they wouldn't have been comfortable with years ago.
Okay. I have a different feeling about the food on my table, but I was there once upon a time. I was an animal rights advocate for many, many years, and I've modified it a lot now, but I think it only, in the whole, well, whatever, I'm not going to go there. Jason.
First, I like this one. I think it's related to the where the good begins, right? I think he talked about how does we decide what's good or bad. So he used the word a man posits the realm of goodness, and so I think just somebody decide what's good, and then which I think the purpose of good for most of people just security, comfort, and benevolence. That's it. Okay, so it's no absolute good on that. It's just posit. Okay, and then you feel security, comfort, and benevolence. You have this kind of feeling. That's the only purpose. So then he go to the common people of children. Okay, so eternal cheerfulness of the common people and the children. So I believe it's on the stupid people side. Let's put it this way. Most of common people will think about, oh, that's good to follow, and only the great singer, okay, will have this feeling of the gloominess and the akin to bad conscience, which associates with the previous one, which is no big deal, okay, just bad conscience, okay. So if you want to go back to Aphorisms 52, why we worry about bad conscience? Because they just give you a bad reputation. It's difficult to deal with bad reputation. That means how does other people think about me? So it's difficult to deal with. Okay, so lesson to take on this one: ignore the social norm. Okay, because that's just some man posit for the goodness, which for the purpose of security, comfort, and benevolence, this kind of feeling. If you don't feel this way, that's fine. Just bad conscience. Okay, that's I read on this one, you know, and that's why I like it. So.
Yeah, right. No, that's a good take on it. Audrey.
I think it's a similar take that I have. I like this one too, but I liked all of them actually. But this one is basically, I thought Barbara was right on with the, you know, that was a great analogy. And hence now we have all these really great thinkers who spend all their time thinking and reducing things to like what to really analyze everything. And so that's they could be gloomy, they agree, they have a lot of grief, or we complain and say, well, what are we going to learn from philosophy? What do these guys know? So and we ignore them, but that's what I think he's thinking. Like, you really have to be willing to go beyond to really make it work and have people understand you, or understand their own, that you're acting in your own best work, in your own worst interests, or you're working against your best interests. And that you need philosophers, thinkers to every now and then. Well, they're doomed for this calling that they have, because we are so stuck in our comfort zones.
Yeah, good. That's good. Yeah, I like that. I still think I have a feeling we sort of lost track of what I started with the whole time here. And it's just I think this is a comment on how good and evil are interpreted, and are there's a spectrum here in a way. It's not just, well, I think it's an attack on moral dualism as well. Christina.
Yes, I am into psychology, so I think the majority of people don't see themselves. So that's why they see the person in front of them. Let's say you have a big pile of goods and you want to take a little bit more for your family, but the other one also wants to take a bit more for his family. So for you, that is bad if the other does it, but if you do it for the good of your family. So, so because you don't see your evil, you don't see you see the evil outside of yourself. It's not evil, it's just that, let's say we have limited resources and we go for the same pile. But yeah, I don't want to repeat myself. So, and when you start to analyze things and to see that you are as greedy as the other person around, but it's not greediness, it's for survival, right? Well, when you start analyzing all this, you realize that we are what we are. We are as evil as the other person. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, the thought that I had in the last couple of comments was I think there are an awful lot of people who are unhappy, gloomy, and grief-ridden because they do think about all of those things that you're mentioning. And they do this, having the courage to attack your own convictions. We're clearly not, and notice how I'm including all of you, we're clearly not in the majority of people who don't even care what some of these aphorisms are and don't even know they exist. But when you pursue philosophical thinking at all, you can't almost, in my experience, you can't help but be a little disenchanted with the world in general. It almost comes with it. Yeah. Okay.
Oh my God, yes. So
So we're
sad.
well, I'm so happy to be in the company of great thinkers who share my thing here. Okay, we're going to do one more. We're going to do 54 because I think 54. Oh, Fred. Okay, go ahead, Fred.
No, go ahead. Go on.
Okay, we're going to do 54 and then we're going to quit. I think 54 is, for me, is a pretty straightforward attack on the thing in itself, Kant's thing in itself. It's a description of appearance is all we have, and drawing on the birth of tragedy. The dream is the Apollonian interpretation of the world, our artistic creation that makes it dream-like. Because there isn't anything at the bottom. There is just what you see and can touch and can feel. And beyond our sensory experience, there isn't anything in itself that appearance hangs on to. So what I selected out of this appearance is for me that which lives and is effective and goes so far in its self-mockery that it makes me feel that this is appearance and will-o'-the-wisp and a dance of spirits and nothing more, that among all these dreamers, I too, who, quote, know, am dancing my dance. I think this is a really nice way of saying none of it means anything. So anyway, but I think it's also just another gratuitous attack on Kant's notion of the thing in itself, that all of these appearances are attached to, or the qualities, right? There's whatever those things are. Been a long time since I read Kant, so I'm not current with whatever. But that was the idea. There's something at the bottom that's real. We just can't get to it because there's just nothing but stuff there. Jason.
Yeah, I just say I agree with you, and but I think he's not only attacking Kant, he's attacking all the tradition, okay, Western tradition, including mind body dualism, including John Locke talk about the primary, secondary quality, including Aristotle, essence, appearance. Okay, all these concept to him is nonsense, because what's if you take out all that's a very easy question, right? If you take out all the appearance, okay, what's left for essence? So Jason become a Jason because they have the Jason is there. Yeah, I'm gone totally. What's left, right? I think that's the easy question. And then the reason I'm talking about Descartes is talk about dream, because you think about it. If you are a dreamer, if you dream all the time, can you claim you are dreaming? Okay, it's aware, right? So in a way, if you say, Jason, you are dreaming all the time, yes, like I'm dreaming all the time, then that's me. Okay, that's the essence of Jason. That's the same as awakened Jason. So I think that's quite obvious. He is reject the entire Western tradition. Probably only person he will agree is Spinoza, because he probably, I forget about this.
Yeah. The other thing I got out of this was a genuine affirmation of, that's what I think the last part of it means, of even if life is a dream state in some ways, it's great to just keep going. It's part of the value in life itself. I think this is a very affirmative statement, life affirming statement. So, well, all right then. I am going to be posting, here's what's going to happen next time. We have 1 hour. We have 2 aphorisms left in book 1. And these are really dense, both of them. And I don't know if they'll take up the whole hour or not. But what I'd sort of like to do before we start on book 2, although I'm going to assign a couple of extra aphorisms for next week. I'm going to assign for you to read, is a reflection on book 1. What do you think? Where are we at with Nietzsche? Just sort of a little assessment. I'll give you my little assessment. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to, but I'm going to try to get a grasp. I'm rereading all of book 1 again to sort of see what kind of continuity, if any, is there. Why is this called book 1? I don't know, but I've read a few of the aphorisms in the next one, and there's a sense that something different is going on in book 2. So I think that certain groundwork is being laid in book 1, a certain amount of skepticism, if you will. And so I'd like to do that, but that's just me. So that's sort of what I'm throwing in for those of you that are still here. Christina, thanks for coming today. It was nice to have you. Where are you calling from?
Thank you. I am in Montreal, Canada.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, you have Montreal bagels near you.
Do you
Oh.
have land that I can move in and build a house? Do you have
Oh,
land where I can move and build a house?
Could you repeat the question?
I would like to live in Montreal. So,
Yeah,
do you
it's a
have any
great.
land that I can rent and buy it and build
Oh,
my own?
I rent a little place, but yeah. So
Okay. All right. So we're moving on. I'm going to be posting the next one in 5 minutes. So I'll see you next week for 1 hour. And thank you so much. So many people participated today. This is really awesome. Okay.